Hey there, friends. How do you define a banana republic? It's not just corruption or instability. It's when institutions that are supposed to be independent start serving the executive. When law bends to power and the economy keeps running mainly because the currency hasn't yet lost its credibility. Now, if you take that framework and look at what's happening right now in the United States, the parallels are getting uncomfortable. Hey all, welcome to ShareTreck, where science meets investments, and I'm your host Raj. Today, we're taking a deep look at something that goes beyond politics. It's about how a country known for its democratic ideals is slowly adopting the institutional behaviors typical of, for the lack of a better term, a banana republic. And that has massive implications for investors, markets, and stability. And that's why this video. Well, let's start off first of all with the definition of a banana republic. Well, the term banana republic was coined in the early 1900s to describe small, politically unstable countries in Latin America whose economies were dominated by foreign corporations, often propped up by corrupt elites and weak institutions. Economically, they were dependent on a single export, for example, like banana, coffee, or sugar. And politically, they were dependent on whoever controlled the military, the courts, or the treasury. The key features are consistent: judicial capture, where court loses independence; executive overreach, where leaders rewrite rules to favor themselves. And then you have electoral manipulation, something like gerrymandering or unfair systems that will dilute the popular will. And then you have institutional paralysis, where government gridlock leads to debt and instability and lack of performance of the duties that are expected of a government. We also have currency distortion, because a strong or weak currency masking underlying dysfunction seems to be a main characteristic in these kind of economies. So let's see how those apply to the world's largest democracy and the strongest economy in the world. Well, let's start off with judicial capture and institutional erosion. One of the hallmarks of a democracy is an impartial jury. But over the last few years, we have seen a trend where judicial appointments have increasingly disregarded recommendations from the American Bar Association, an organization that for decades helped ensure judges were selected on merit and integrity. At the same time, several Supreme Court rulings have expanded executive power and overturned long-standing precedents that once kept the branches of government balanced. To put it simply, when judiciary becomes an extension of the ruling power, rule of the law gives way to rule of decree. A banana republic doesn't need to rig elections overtly. It only needs to tilt the system so that votes don't count equally. In the US, the Electoral College and Senate structure already make some votes worth more than others. For example, a voter in Wyoming has several times the electoral influence of a voter in California. Add to that partisan gerrymandering, where district boundaries are drawn to predetermine outcomes, and you get what the Brennan Center calls entrenched minority rule. That's not democracy. That's managed representation, where politicians choose the voters instead of voters choosing their politician. Federal courts have largely stepped back from regulating partisan map drawing, which means the system now effectively allows politicians to choose their voters, not the other way around. Check out my Substack article today on this topic, where I give the example of court cases and more details to back each of my assertions. The link to my Substack is in the description. Next, let's look at another sign of banana republic, which is unpredictability. When national policy swings sharply depending on who is in power. Under the current administration, we have seen unilateral withdrawals from international accords, frequent tariff reversals, and trade measures imposed or lifted by executive order. For global investors, that's a nightmare. Stability and rule of law depend on consistency, and when agreements signed by one government can be voided by the next, contracts lose their meaning. This kind of volatility erodes trust, not just in government, but in the currency itself. Now let's talk economics, the hidden safety net. In most countries, repeated debt ceiling-like crises, government shutdowns, and fiscal standoffs would trigger a sovereign downgrade or market panic. And in fact, in 2023, Fitch Ratings downgraded US debt from AAA status to AA+, citing erosion of governance. But because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, it masks the dysfunction. It allows Washington to borrow cheaply and run persistent deficits that would sink any other G7 economy. It's like a patient surviving on transfusion. As long as the world keeps using dollars, the system holds, but that doesn't make it healthy. Now let's ask, what if this happened elsewhere? For example, let us take if any other G7 nation had a judiciary stacked with politically aligned judges, a parliament paralyzed by partisan gridlock, a leader governing by decree through executive orders, and a pattern of ignoring international commitments. It would be called institutional backsliding or democratic decay. Yet in the United States, these symptoms are described as polarization, a softer term that hides how serious the erosion really is. Now, the question from your side, I think I can read your thought bubble. It says, Raj, but why should investors care? Well, from an investor's perspective, democratic stability is not just a moral issue. It's a risk management factor. When institutions weaken, policy risk and regulatory unpredictability increase. When courts lose independence, corporate disputes become political. And when fiscal policy is held hostage to partisan brinkmanship, bond markets eventually react. History shows that once institutional trust breaks down, markets lose confidence faster than governments can react. And rebuilding that takes decades. Where would we see such evidence? Well, look at the dollar index, bond yields, and the price of gold. In 2023, Fitch Ratings downgraded US sovereign credit from AAA to AA+, explicitly citing repeated political standoffs and erosion of governance. We are waiting for the next downgrade. The nation's debt to GDP ratio, now above 120, continues to rise amid congressional gridlock. Only reasons markets have not reacted more violently is the reserve currency privilege of the US dollar. Global demand for dollars allows Washington to borrow at artificially low rates, a cushion that conceals the depth of the dysfunction. But reserve status is not immune to erosion. According to IMF's currency composition of official foreign exchange reserves, or COFER, data, the dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 71% in 1999 to under 59% in 2024. It is still dominant, but the direction of travel is clear, and it reflects waning global confidence in American institutional reliability. Likewise, if you look at the global reserves of global central banks, you would see that the share of gold as percentage of the treasury has equaled or increased that of United States treasury bonds in the global central bank reserves. Now, that's again a serious erosion of the US influence. So friends, with all of those things in place, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when all these things will start to manifest. And in this backdrop, when you look at the current situation, symbolically, the demolition is going on in the White House, and you have army in the streets, and you also have court cases that do not address or that are not concerned with anything to do with the betterment of the people or betterment of the republic or anything of that sort. And you have the House in a gridlock, shut down for almost 4 weeks now. So with all of these things going on, just imagine if there's a downgrade in the rating of US sovereign debt, then that could be the last nail on the coffin. So this is what I am thinking as a retail investor. Now, I would like to hear from you guys. What do you think from wherever you're sitting, whether you're watching this video from Europe or US or India or Australia or China or anywhere else? What is your thought about the United States from an investor perspective, not the political side? I'm looking at the investment side. Do you think the dollar can still continue to rule? Do you think the bonds are having a reasonable yield at this point of time? And linked to all of this is the US stock market. So I want to hear from you guys. Thanks for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, can you please subscribe and help grow the channel? One final request to you. Please visit our Substack and subscribe for free. You will get greater details that back up what I'm saying in the long form video. The link to the Substack is in the description. See you there soon. Well friends, that brings me to an end of this video. Bye for now.